My wife pulled our son off his swim team and called it spiritual warfare, then threatened to take him forever if I ever fought back for the one thing that made him happy again. He's quitting the team, effective immediately. Coach Renata told me that on a Tuesday, standing at the edge of the Whitmore Aquatic Center pool deck, her clipboard still in her hand. Water dripped off the lane ropes behind her. 12 kids were mid-set, goggles fogged, unaware their whole world had just shifted without them. Quitting, I repeated. Since when? Since about 20 minutes ago. Your wife came in, told the front desk, and left before I could even talk to her. I drove home going 9 over the limit the whole way, hands too tight on the wheel. When I opened the front door, Wyatt was sitting on the bottom stair in his practice clothes, still damp at the collar from the last swim he didn't know would be his last. His eyes were red. He looked up at me like I might be able to undo it. Dad, why does Mom hate me? That sentence took the air out of my chest. Priscilla was in the kitchen, drying a mug that was already dry, moving it in slow circles with a dish towel like nothing in the house had happened. You pulled him off the team, I said, without telling me. I protected him, she said, calm as still water. You were too weak to make the hard call, so I made it for both of us. You had no right. I'm his mother, she said. I saw the danger even when you couldn't. I looked past her, down the hallway, to where Wyatt had gone quiet on the stairs. 12 years old, and he already understood something I was only beginning to accept. His mother had just made a unilateral decision about his life and called it love. I didn't know it yet, but that Tuesday in March was the day the marriage actually ended. Everything after it was just the paperwork catching up to reality. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the 11 years that came before it. Priscilla and I met in 2013 at New Covenant Fellowship, a non-denominational church on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, in a young adults group that met on Thursday nights in a repurposed Sunday school room that still smelled like crayons and carpet glue. She was 26, I was 28. She ran the welcome table. I showed up because a coworker invited me and I had nothing better to do on a Thursday. I stayed because of her. She was warm back then, genuinely warm, not performed. She remembered the names of people's sick grandmothers. She brought soup to anyone who mentioned being under the weather, whether she knew them well or not. I fell for her inside of 2 months, and I married her 14 months after that, in August of 2014, in the same sanctuary where we'd met. Wyatt was born in June of 2014, actually. He came a little early, and we got married that August with him strapped into a car seat in the front pew, which our families found either scandalous or delightful depending on which side of the aisle they sat on. Nobody made a big deal of it publicly. Privately, Priscilla's mother, Dolores, made it a very big deal indeed, in the particular way that some women make things a big deal without ever raising their voice. For the first few years, faith was a good thing in our house. It gave us a rhythm, Sunday service, Wednesday small group, grace before dinner, a framed verse in the hallway that Priscilla had cross-stitched herself, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. I believed in that verse. I still do, in a way. I just didn't understand yet how differently two people could interpret the word train. The tightening started small enough that I barely noticed it happening. When Wyatt was 4, Priscilla decided no more cartoons with talking animals doing magic. She'd read something online about how it normalized witchcraft to children, and even though I thought it was a stretch, I let it go because it was one show and there were 100 others. When he was 6, it was the school Halloween parade. She kept him home that day, told the school he had a stomach bug, and had him spend the afternoon at his grandmother's instead, reading a picture Bible about Daniel in the lion's den. When he was 8, it was play dates. She started screening the other kids' families, asking pointed questions about church attendance before she'd agree to a sleepover. And slowly our son's friend circle got smaller and smaller, filtered down to the handful of families from New Covenant who passed her invisible test. Every single time I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. It was one show, one parade, one play date. I told myself I was picking my battles. What I was actually doing, though I didn't have language for it then, was training myself to fold. Every small surrender taught both of us that resistance wasn't worth the cost. There was a specific incident back in the fall of 2019 that I think about now as the moment I should have understood exactly what I was dealing with. Wyatt was 5, and his kindergarten class did a unit on family trees. Part of the assignment was drawing a picture of everyone who loved you. Wyatt drew me, Priscilla, his grandmother, and, because he loved animals more than almost anything at that age, our neighbor's golden retriever, Biscuit. Priscilla found the drawing in his backpack, called the school, and requested a meeting with his teacher, a woman named Ms. Okafor, to discuss what she called concerning attachment patterns, specifically that our son had placed a dog on the same emotional tier as his family, which she said reflected a disordered view of creation's hierarchy that needed correcting at home. Ms. Okafor, to her credit, told Priscilla that a 5-year-old drawing his neighbor's dog was not a theological crisis. Priscilla left the meeting convinced the school had a secularism problem. She came home and had a long, quiet talk with Wyatt about the proper order of God's creatures. He was 5. He nodded along because that's what 5-year-olds do with their mothers. But I remember him asking me, later that night tucked into bed, if it was still okay that he loved Biscuit. I told him of course it was. I didn't tell him his mother thought otherwise. I have wondered since then whether that was kindness or cowardice, probably some of both. By the time Wyatt turned turned 10, the world Priscilla had built around him had a very specific shape. Homeschool co-op 3 mornings a week alongside public school the other 2 days, a compromise I'd fought hard for and considered a victory at the time. Youth group on Wednesdays. A vetted, shrinking list of approved friends. No sleepovers outside of church families. Music screened for lyrical content. Books screened for spiritual permissiveness, a phrase Priscilla used so often it had started to lose meaning to me, the way any word does when you hear it enough times. And through all of it, swimming was the one thing that stayed untouched. Wyatt had started at age 7, at a summer learn-to-swim program at the Whitmore Aquatic Center, and something in him had lit up the first time he pushed off the wall and felt his body move fast through water. By 10, he'd joined the year-round team. By 11, Coach Renata was talking about regional qualifying times. By 12, it was the only thing in his life that was entirely, unambiguously his. I think Priscilla let it go for as long as she did because she didn't have a theological framework yet for objecting to it. Swimming wasn't cartoons, it wasn't Halloween, it was exercise, discipline, a wholesome extracurricular that other families at New Covenant also let their kids do. For 5 years, it was the one door she left open. There's another moment from that stretch of years I keep coming back to, one that shows the shape of things more clearly, in hindsight, than almost anything else. When Wyatt was 9, he made a friend at the Whitmore pool named Eli Brannigan, a kid from 2 towns over whose family didn't go to church at all. They were inseparable for about 4 months. Same lane group, same age, the kind of easy, uncomplicated friendship kids build fast around a shared activity. Eli came over twice for dinner. Priscilla was polite both times, cheerful even, and I remember thinking, naively, that swimming had somehow carved out a space in her that the rest of our life hadn't. Then Eli's parents got divorced that winter, messily, with a custody fight that made the local news because of a restraining order involved. Priscilla found out through another swim parent at pickup one afternoon, and by that Sunday, she decided the friendship needed to end. Not gradually, immediately. She told Wyatt that Eli's home was a broken environment, and that continued closeness with him would invite that brokenness in. She didn't forbid him from being friendly at practice, exactly. She just made sure there were no more dinners, no more rides home together, no more of the casual after-school hangouts that had made the friendship real in the first place. Within 2 months, without any single dramatic conversation, it had quietly died on the vine, the way things do when one parent decides alone that it should. Wyatt asked about Eli for a while afterward. Why doesn't he come over anymore? I gave him some version of an answer that wasn't really an answer. Schedules got busy, that kind of thing. Because I didn't yet have the spine to tell him the truth, which was that his mother had ended a friendship because a divorce down the street had frightened her. I think about that a lot now. It was the same pattern that would eventually cost him the swim team itself, just in miniature, 3 years early, and I missed it. Or maybe I saw it and told myself it wasn't a pattern yet. I don't want to make this sound like there was nothing good in those years, because there was. In the summer of 2021, we drove to Hilton Head for a week, just the 3 of us. No church calendar to build the trip around. Priscilla built sand castles with Wyatt for 2 hours one afternoon, while I read on a towel nearby, and I remember watching her laugh, a real, unguarded laugh, head back, sand in her hair, and thinking that whatever tension had crept into our house during the school year always seemed to loosen when we were somewhere far from New Covenant's calendar. She wasn't a different person on that trip. She was, I think now, the person underneath the fear, the one who only had room to show up when nothing around her was reinforcing the idea that danger was constantly closing in. I've held on to that memory carefully since everything else happened, because it's proof, at least to me, that this didn't start as cruelty. It started as love that got hijacked by something bigger than either of us understood how to name at the time. Then, in March of last year, one of the older girls on the team, a 15-year-old named Josie, showed up to a Saturday meet in a new competition suit, a standard USA swimming-approved racing suit, the kind every serious swimmer wears. And Priscilla happened to be there that day instead of dropping Wyatt off and leaving, and something in her rearranged itself on that pool deck. She didn't say anything to me that day. She waited 4 days, and then she drove to the Whitmore Aquatic Center on a Tuesday afternoon without telling me, and pulled our son off the only thing that had ever been entirely his. The night after she pulled him off the team, I sat with Wyatt on his bed while he stared at the ceiling, not crying anymore, just flat, the way kids get when they've decided that fighting isn't worth it. "It's fine," he said. "Mom always wins anyway." I didn't have a response for that. I wish I could tell you I did, that I said something wise and fatherly in that moment. I didn't. I just sat there while my 12-year-old son explained to me, in a tired, resigned voice, the actual power structure of our household. For the first week after she pulled him off the team, he barely left his room. He stopped eating breakfast. He stopped asking to go outside. The bright motion blur energy that used to fill our house, him doing cannonballs off the porch steps, timing himself running to the mailbox and back, just went quiet. Priscilla, meanwhile, treated the whole thing as a settled matter. "He'll thank me when he's older," she told me one night, folding laundry with the particular briskness she used when she wanted a conversation to be over. "Right now, he's too young to see the danger. That's my job, to see it for him." "What danger, Priscilla? He's 12. He's thinking about his backstroke splits, not girls in swimsuits. That's exactly what the enemy wants you to think, she said, not even looking up from the towel she was folding. By the time you notice what's happening, it's already done. The lust gets normalized so slowly you don't even feel it landing. I told her no. I told her she couldn't just unilaterally end something that mattered this much to our son. She smiled at me. Not a cruel smile, that's what got me. It was almost pitying. Like she already knew my objection didn't carry any real weight. Like we both understood, on some level, that she'd already made the decision, and I was just going through the motions of disagreeing with it. A week and a half later, I called a family therapist a colleague had recommended, a woman named Sabine Ferreira, who specialized in kids coming out of high-control religious households. I described the situation over the phone, the swim team, the shrinking friend group, the screened books, the golden retriever incident from years back, which I mentioned almost as a joke and then heard my own voice shake a little describing it. Sabine was quiet for a second. That's not protection, she said. That's control. And in a kid this age, it leaves marks you don't always see right away. Sleep problems, appetite changes, a kind of learned helplessness. Nothing I want matters because someone else always decides. Has he said anything like that? I thought about mom always wins anyway. Yeah, I said. He has. That call was the beginning of me doing something I hadn't done in 11 years of marriage. I started keeping records. Not because I had a plan yet. I told myself I was just trying to understand the pattern, to see if I was overreacting or if something was actually wrong. I started a folder on my laptop. Dates. What was said, what was taken away, and why. The Halloween parade, the playdate screenings, the kindergarten drawing meeting with Ms. Okafor, which I emailed her about and which she confirmed in writing had happened almost exactly the way I remembered it. Then I called Coach Renata. Anytime, she said, before I'd even fully finished asking. He's got real talent, and honestly, we've missed him on the deck. The team's been asking about him. I didn't tell Priscilla. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters to the story. I made a decision without consulting my wife, the exact kind of decision I'd been furious at her for making unilaterally. The difference, I told myself, was that I wasn't taking something away from our son. I was giving something back. I re-enrolled him for a Thursday practice, paid the makeup fee out of my own checking account, $60, and picked him up from school myself instead of letting the bus drop him at home. Where are we going? He asked when I turned the wrong direction for our street. Whitmore, I said. His whole face changed. I hadn't seen that particular expression on him in almost 3 weeks. Genuine, unguarded, disbelieving happiness. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. He just started talking, fast, about his 100 fly split and whether Coach Renata had kept his lane assignment and whether Josie had made regionals. A rapid-fire stream of 12-year-old enthusiasm that told me everything I needed to know about how much this had cost him. He dove in like he was coming back to life. I stood at the rail and watched him cut through the water and felt something in my own chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Priscilla was waiting in the kitchen when we got home. She smelled the chlorine on him before either of us said a single word. You went behind my back, she said. I gave him an hour of being a kid, I said. You've proven you can't be trusted, she said, and there was something new in her voice, something colder and more decided than I'd heard before. I'll take more direct action. I asked her what that meant. She didn't answer. She just turned and went upstairs, and I heard our bedroom door close, not slammed, just closed, with a precision that felt worse than a slam would have. I found out what more direct action meant 3 days later, on a Saturday, at a dual meet against a team from Kettering. I wasn't scheduled to be there. Wyatt had gone with another swim family, the Delacroix, since I had a work commitment that morning. But I finished early and drove straight to the venue, wanting to catch even the last few events. I walked in during the boys' 100 fly, Wyatt's best event, and found Priscilla already there, standing at the edge of the bleachers instead of sitting, arms crossed, talking to another parent I didn't recognize in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry. As I got closer, I caught pieces of it. Something about modesty standards these programs refuse to enforce. Something about how some of us actually care what our children are exposed to. The other parent, a woman holding a toddler on her hip, had the fixed, polite smile of someone trapped in a conversation she hadn't asked for. Wyatt touched the wall in third place, a personal best by half a second, and looked up into the stands the way swimmers do, searching for a face. He found mine first. Then he found his mother's, still turned toward the other parent, still talking, not watching the race at all. I saw something drop in his expression, small, quick, gone almost as fast as it appeared, but I saw it. Afterward, in the parking lot, Priscilla caught up to us before we reached the car. I want him pulled from away meets, she said, like we were mid-conversation instead of starting one. I don't like what I saw in that pool today. Girls diving in wearing next to nothing. Boys his age right there next to them changing in the same open area. He meddled, I said. Did you see that part? That's not the point, she said. It's exactly the point, I said. You didn't watch 1 second of his race. You were too busy telling a stranger about modesty standards. She didn't have a response for that one, not right away, and for a moment I thought something might actually land. Then her jaw set, the way it always did when she decided a conversation wasn't worth continuing on my terms. We'll talk at home, she said, and walked to her car. Wyatt didn't say anything the whole ride back. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror once and found him staring out the window, metal still looped around his neck, not touching it, like he'd already decided it didn't count for as much as it should have. 2 days later, her parents showed up, Dolores and Harold, suitcases already in the trunk of their Buick, like this had been planned in advance rather than arranged over a weekend. Harold cornered me on the porch while Dolores went inside to find Priscilla and Wyatt. Son, he said. He always called me son, even though I was 40 and he wasn't my father. A household needs one head. Scripture's clear on that. Ephesians 5. You're supposed to submit to your wife's spiritual discernment, not undercut it behind her back. I didn't undercut anything, I said. I re-enrolled my son in the sport he loves. That's not a theological position, Harold. That's parenting. Everything's a theological position, he said. And I understood, listening to him, exactly where Priscilla had learned to talk the way she did, with total, unshakable certainty that her interpretation of things wasn't an interpretation at all, just a plain reading of the facts that anyone reasonable would arrive at. Inside, Dolores had cornered Wyatt in the living room. I found them there when I came in from the porch, my son sitting stiff on the edge of the couch, shoulders caved in toward his chest, while his grandmother talked at him in a low, steady voice about the importance of honoring his mother, about how disobedience in small things led to disobedience in large things, about a boy she'd known once years ago who'd started with harmless things, she didn't specify what, and ended up completely lost to the world. Wyatt didn't say anything. He just nodded, the same nod I'd seen him give at 5 years old after the biscuit conversation, the nod of a kid who has learned that agreeing is faster and safer than disagreeing, regardless of what he actually believes. The following Monday, Priscilla tried a different lever entirely. She called our joint bank, the account we used for the mortgage and the household bills, and put a hold request on a discretionary transfer I'd set up years earlier, a small monthly amount that covered Wyatt's swim fees, gear, and meet travel. She didn't need my signature to do it. Both our names were on the account, and the branch manager, following policy, honored her request without calling me first. I found out when my card declined at a sporting goods store buying Wyatt new goggles, the old pair having finally cracked at the seam. You froze the swim account, I said when I got home. I redirected some funds, she said, like the distinction mattered. We have other priorities right now. Grace Heritage's enrollment deposit for one, in case we go that direction in the fall. We haven't agreed to Grace Heritage, I said. We haven't agreed to anything. You're using money you don't need right now to make a decision you couldn't win by talking. She didn't deny it. That was the part that told me the most. She didn't even bother constructing a defense, just looked at me with the calm certainty of someone who believed the ends justified whatever means she reached for. I moved the swim fees to a separate account the next morning, one only I could touch, and never mentioned it to her again. It was a small, quiet countermove, and I remember it now as the first time I stopped warning her before I acted. Something had shifted in me by then, even if I couldn't have named it yet. That Sunday, after church, Priscilla sat me down at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of her, like we were about to negotiate a business contract instead of talk about our son. She'd apparently spent the week drafting terms. Here's what I'm willing to do, she said. He can keep swimming. But you agree to men's group at church every Tuesday. Youth group goes from 1 night to 3, and we switch him to Grace Heritage Academy in the fall instead of public school. I looked at the legal pad. Grace Heritage Academy was a Christian school 40 minutes away that Priscilla had mentioned once, years earlier, and that I'd assumed was a passing thought, not an actual plan she'd been holding in reserve. That's not a compromise, I said. That's a leash with some extra room on it. It's a reasonable middle ground, she said. You get your swimming. I get my son's soul protected. Everyone wins. No, I said. Her face went through something in that moment. I watched it happen. Watched the surprise land and then harden into something colder. She wasn't used to that word from me. 11 years, and I don't think I'd said an unqualified no to her more than a handful of times. If you do this, she said very quietly, I'll leave and I'll take him with me. No judge in this county sides with a father who forces his 12-year-old son into a pool full of half-naked teenage girls against his mother's moral objections. Try me, I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant every word of it. I re-enrolled him permanently the next morning, paid the full season fee, $410, out of an account Priscilla didn't have access to, one I'd opened years earlier for a work bonus and mostly forgotten about. I told Wyatt when I picked him up from school that Friday that he was back on the team for good, starting Wednesday. No more secret arrangements, no more asking permission. He hugged me so hard in the school pickup line that I nearly lost my balance. A woman in a minivan behind us honked gently, and I realized I'd been standing there holding my son for almost a full minute, neither of us in any hurry to let go. That should have been the good part of the story. It wasn't, though. It was the beginning of the worst part. Friday morning, 4 days after that hug, I came downstairs and found 2 suitcases sitting by the front door. Priscilla stood at the top of the stairs, and behind her, half a step back, was Wyatt, still in his pajamas, hair sleep-flattened on one side, blinking like he wasn't entirely sure he was awake. We're staying at my parents' house, Priscilla said, not looking at me, looking somewhere just past my shoulder. I pulled out my phone. I'd saved my attorney's number to my favorites 2 weeks weeks earlier, after the legal pad conversation, because some part of me had known it was coming to this. I held the screen up so she could see the contact already pulled up, ready to dial. "Do you really want to start this right now?" I asked. She froze on the stairs. I watched her run the calculation. I could see it happening behind her eyes, the same way you can watch someone recalculate a route on a GPS. Whatever she'd expected from me that morning, it hadn't been this. She turned to Wyatt without another word to me and told him to go back upstairs. He looked at me first, a quick searching glance, waiting for some kind of signal, before he went. I gave him a small nod, the only thing I could offer in that moment, and he disappeared back down the hallway. Priscilla carried both suitcases back upstairs herself, one in each hand, refusing my offer to help with a look that could have frozen the pipes. The guest room door clicked shut a few minutes later. Not a slam, just a click, quiet and final, and somehow it was louder in my ears than any slammed door I'd ever heard in my life. 3 weeks after that, on a Wednesday afternoon in April, a process server knocked on my front door while I was still in my work clothes, tie loosened, one shoe off. He handed me an envelope and asked me to confirm my name before he'd let me sign for it. Custody papers. Priscilla was petitioning for primary physical custody with supervised visitation for me. Supervised, like I was someone who needed to be watched around my own son. I sat down at the kitchen table and read through it twice, my hands not entirely steady. The petition's language was almost entirely about faith. It described swimming as an environment that normalizes immodesty and undermines the moral formation of a minor child. It cited my repeated pattern of undermining maternal spiritual authority. It mentioned the Golden Retriever kindergarten meeting, somehow framed as evidence of my historical pattern of prioritizing secular attachments over spiritual formation. Dolores, I assumed, had fed her that detail, or maybe Priscilla had never forgotten it either. What the petition did not mention anywhere in 14 pages was that our son had stopped eating breakfast for 2 weeks. It didn't mention that he'd told me his mother always wins anyway in a voice with no fight left in it. It didn't mention Sabine or the notes she'd been keeping, or the specific documented despair a 12-year-old boy had described in a therapist's office because he no longer believed anything he wanted mattered. I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Kessler, who'd been recommended by a friend from work. She read through the petition while I sat on the other end of the phone, saying nothing, waiting. "This is weaker than it looks," she finally said. "It's built entirely on her beliefs about swimming, not on anything that's actually happening to your son. Judges care about outcomes, not doctrine. If we can show the court what this custody arrangement is actually doing to Wyatt, the eating, the sleep, the withdrawal, that changes the entire frame of this case." We spent the next 6 weeks building it. Coach Renata wrote a detailed account of Wyatt's abrupt withdrawal from the team in March and his emotional state during the brief re-enrollment in April. She described him as a different child during those weeks, animated, present, engaged with his teammates in a way he hadn't been in months. Sabine provided formal notes from 4 sessions, careful and clinical, documenting a pattern of what she called learned helplessness consistent with chronic autonomy suppression in the home environment, along with the exact language Wyatt had used in session. The wish more than once that he could just disappear for a while so nobody would need anything from him. His spring report card came back with his math grade up 2 full letter marks from the previous term, right around the same window he'd briefly been back in the water. His teacher noted, unprompted, in the comments section, that he seems more engaged and confident lately. Diane built a timeline that laid all of it out side by side, the swim team, his mood, his grades, his sleep, so that anyone looking at it, doctrine aside, could see the pattern for themselves. 2 weeks before the scheduled trial date, Priscilla's attorney called Diane's office and asked for a meeting, a settlement conference they called it, a chance to resolve things before trial without a judge deciding it for us. I sat across a conference table from my wife of 11 years on a gray Thursday morning in June, in a law office 30 minutes from the house we'd bought together, watching her decide, in real time, exactly how far she was willing to go to keep control of our son. She had a manila folder in front of her, closed, her hand resting flat on top of it like she was keeping something contained. She slid it across the table toward me. Her attorney glanced at her, a small, uncertain glance, like even he wasn't fully sure what was in it. "I found something better," she said. I didn't reach for the folder right away. Something about the way she said it, "found something better," made my stomach drop before I even understood why. Diane put a hand lightly on the table near mine, a small signal to slow down, and opened the folder herself instead of letting me touch it first. Inside was a printout of a group text thread. I recognized the contact photo at the top. Dolores, Priscilla's mother, and beneath her name, a thread going back 4 months, titled by whoever had set it up as Prayer Warriors, Wyatt. I skimmed it, my eyes catching pieces at a time. Dolores, in early March, writing that she'd found the perfect solution and that Pastor Nunez agrees this is spiritually necessary. Harold, a week later, mentioning a woman named Connie Voss, someone I'd never heard of, described as experienced in these situations, and willing to help walk Priscilla through the transition. And then, from Priscilla herself, dated the same week she'd pulled Wyatt off the swim team. "Talked to Connie today. She thinks full relocation might be the cleanest path if he pushes back in court. Says a new environment resets everything faster than fighting it out here. I looked up at Diane. She was already reading it a second time, her expression very still. Who is Connie Voss? I asked. Nobody answered right away. Priscilla's attorney shifted in his seat. Diane found the answer for us 3 days later, after a record search that took less time than I expected. Connie Voss ran something called a family restoration consultancy out of a small office in Kentucky, a business that, on closer inspection, specialized in helping parents relocate children across state lines during custody disputes, marketed specifically to families in what her website called spiritually compromised legal environments, which was a polished way of saying courts that might not side with a parent's religious objections. There was more in the thread. A message from Priscilla, dated late April, the same week the suitcases had appeared by our door, mentioning that Connie had identified a property near her sister's place outside Lexington, and that once we're established there, distance alone makes shared custody impractical, and Ohio loses jurisdiction pretty fast if we've been gone 6 months. I sat with that for a long moment. The swim team, the theology, the legal pad negotiation, the suitcases, all of it, I realized, hadn't been about protecting Wyatt from immodest swimsuits at all. Or maybe it had started that way, in her mind, genuinely. But somewhere in the last 4 months, it had become something else entirely. A plan, coordinated with her parents and a stranger in Kentucky, to remove our son from the state before I could stop her, using the language of spiritual warfare as cover for what was, underneath all of it, a strategy to win by making the fight impossible to have. The detail that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since March, a moving truck estimate email I'd glimpsed once on the shared family iPad, dismissed at the time as Priscilla researching something for her parents' house, suddenly made a different kind of sense. I'd seen it and explained it away. It had been there the whole time. Further down the thread was a message I read 3 times before it fully landed. It was from Dolores, sent the same week Priscilla had presented her legal pad terms across our kitchen table, and it read, in part, that if I refused reasonable spiritual leadership, the family should be prepared to move forward with Connie's plan, regardless of his cooperation, and that Priscilla shouldn't feel obligated to negotiate in good faith with someone who'd already shown he couldn't be trusted to protect his own son. The legal pad conversation, I understood then, sitting in that conference room, hadn't been an actual offer at all. It had been a formality, a box to check before the real plan proceeded, something to point to later and say she'd tried to compromise first. I thought back to the flicker of surprise on her face when I'd said no. I'd read it, at the time, as her being unsettled by my resistance. Sitting there with the folder open in front of me, I understood it differently. She'd been surprised because my no had forced her hand sooner than she wanted, not because she'd expected a yes. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show, linked in the description for early access to new stories and better audio quality. Now back to the video. I looked up from the folder, and I looked at Priscilla, and for the first time in 11 years, I don't think I recognized the person sitting across from me. You were going to take him to Kentucky, I said, without telling me, so a judge here couldn't rule on it in time. It wasn't like that, she said, and even as she said it, her voice didn't have its usual certainty behind it. Connie just explained our options. We hadn't decided anything. There's a property listing, I said. There's a moving estimate. There's a message about jurisdiction. That's not exploring options, Priscilla. That's a plan. Her attorney closed the folder gently, like he was trying to physically stop the conversation from going further, but it was too late for that. Diane was already speaking, calm and precise, laying out for the room what a judge would make of a documented plan to relocate a child specifically to defeat the other parent's custodial rights. The phrase she used was clear evidence of parental alienation intent, and I watched Priscilla's attorney's face change as she said it, watched him understand that his client had just handed the opposing side the entire case. I did it for him, Priscilla said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word him, the first real crack I'd heard in weeks. You don't understand what it's like, watching your son slip further from everything that matters and feeling like nobody else sees it. I saw a boy who stopped eating breakfast, I said. I saw a boy who told me his mother always wins, like that was just a fact of his life he'd already accepted. That's what I saw, Priscilla. Not a swimsuit, not lust, a kid giving up. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Her father's language from the porch echoed in my head. A household needs one head. Except in that conference room, watching my wife's face crumple, I understood something he never had. A household needs 2 people willing to actually see the child in the middle of it. That was the entire thing we'd lost. Long before the swim team, long before Kentucky. Somewhere in 11 years, Priscilla had stopped being able to see Wyatt as a separate person with his own wants, and had started seeing him only as a soul she was responsible for winning or losing. Priscilla's attorney tried once more to steer things back toward negotiation, suggesting a short break so both sides could regroup, but Priscilla waved him off without looking at him, which told me something had already changed in the room's actual power dynamic, whatever the paperwork still said about who represented whom. You don't get to decide what he loses anymore, I said. Not Not without me. Not without him having a say in it, too. That's what this whole thing was always about, even before the folder. You deciding, alone, what he's allowed to want. Someone has to decide, she said, quieter now, some of the earlier certainty draining out of her voice. Kids don't know what's good for them yet. He knew exactly what was good for him, I said. He told anyone who'd listen. You just weren't willing to hear it unless it matched what you already believed. I need you to say something to me clearly, I said, and I need you to actually hear yourself say it. You were going to take our son 8 hours away without my knowledge to keep me from being able to stop you. Is that true? She didn't answer for a long time. Her attorney touched her arm, a quiet signal not to respond, but she looked at me anyway, and something in her face finally broke all the way open. Yes, she said, barely above a whisper. I was scared I was losing him. And I thought if I got him somewhere far enough away, I'd have time to fix it. He wasn't lost, I said. He was 12 years old and he wanted to swim. That's all this ever was. The settlement conference ended without a settlement. Priscilla's attorney requested a short recess, then came back and asked for a continuance on the entire case, which Diane didn't oppose, mostly, I think, because the ground beneath Priscilla's position had just shifted so completely that even her own lawyer needed time to figure out what remained standing. Word travels fast in a church community, even when nobody intends it to. I don't know exactly how it happened, whether Priscilla told her small group leader looking for comfort, or whether Harold mentioned Connie Voss to the wrong person at the wrong dinner, but within 2 weeks, most of New Covenant Fellowship knew some version of what had happened in that conference room. The reaction split in ways I hadn't expected. Dolores and Harold doubled down completely, treating the exposure of the relocation plan as persecution rather than consequence, and started attending a different, smaller congregation 40 minutes north that Harold described as less compromised. They stopped speaking to me almost entirely, and for a while stopped speaking much to Priscilla either, once it became clear she wasn't going to fight the custody case as hard as they wanted. But other people surprised me. Pastor Nunez, whose name had appeared in that group text as having blessed the relocation idea, called me directly, sounding shaken, and told me he'd never actually endorsed a plan to move Wyatt out of state. Dolores, it turned out, had characterized a much vaguer conversation about spiritual environments as full approval, stretching his words into something he'd never said. He offered, unprompted, to speak with Diane if it would help clarify the record. It did. A woman from Priscilla's small group, someone I'd only ever known as Wyatt's Sunday school teacher, reached out to me privately and said she'd had concerns for over a year about how tightly Priscilla controlled Wyatt's world, but hadn't known how to say so without it looking like she was attacking someone's parenting. She offered to write a letter for the court if it would help. Diane took her up on it. Not everyone I expected support from gave it either. My own brother, Gareth, who'd never much cared for religion one way or another, told me over the phone that he thought I was escalating things unnecessarily by pursuing primary custody instead of pushing harder for an even split, a position he softened considerably once I sent him the group text printout and let him read Dolores's own words for himself. He called back within the hour, quieter, and apologized for assuming there were two equally reasonable sides to something that, once he actually looked at it, clearly wasn't that at all. Coach Renata became something more than a coach during those months. She checked in on Wyatt twice a week, even during the period he wasn't technically on the roster, texted me updates, made sure he had a lane reserved the moment he was cleared to compete again. When she found out secondhand about the Kentucky plan, she told me flatly that she'd have driven to the state line herself if it had come to that. I believed her. Dolores made one last desperate move that July, about 3 weeks before the case resolved. She filed a report with the County Children's Services Office, alleging that I was exposing Wyatt to inappropriate environments at the pool, and that his emotional distress documented in therapy was actually evidence of harm occurring in my home, not hers. A caseworker named Priya Chandrasekaran called me on a Tuesday afternoon, professional and unhurried, and scheduled a home visit for that Friday. I won't pretend those 4 days were easy. I cleaned a house that didn't need cleaning. I reread every email I'd sent Ms. Okafor and Sabine, making sure the paper trail was airtight, in case it came down to a dispute of memory rather than fact. When Priya arrived, she spent 40 minutes walking through the house, asked Wyatt a series of calm, unremarkable questions in a room without me present, and left with a folder of her own notes. The report closed within 2 weeks, unsubstantiated, with a line in the summary that Priya read aloud to me over the phone, that the referred concerns appeared to reflect an ongoing custody dispute rather than a child protection issue. Diane later told me that unfounded reports like that one, made during active litigation, tend to read very differently to a judge than the person filing them intends. Dolores's complaint, meant to weaken my position, ended up in the case file working against her daughters. I found out afterward that Harold had tried something quieter around the same time, a certified letter to Grace Heritage Academy, the Christian school Priscilla had once wanted for Wyatt, inquiring about emergency mid-year enrollment for a family relocating from out of state, dated the same week as the failed CPS report. Diane's investigator found the inquiry through a records request tied to the earlier relocation evidence. It wasn't illegal on its own. It was, though, one more data point in a pattern pattern that made it very hard for anyone in that courtroom to believe the Kentucky plan had been an idle thought Priscilla and her parents floated once and abandoned. Not everyone from that world turned against me, and not everyone from it turned toward me either. Some people just quietly stepped back from the whole situation, which I came to understand as its own kind of small mercy. But one more person surprised me that summer. A father named Desmond Ruiz, whose daughter swam in Wyatt's Lane group, pulled me aside at a meet in July and told me in a low voice that his family had left New Covenant 2 years earlier over concerns about how the church handled a different family situation, one I'd never heard about, involving a teenage girl and a purity pledge gone badly wrong. He didn't go into detail. He just said, "I recognized the pattern the second I heard what happened to your boy. Sorry nobody warned you sooner." It wasn't much. It was also more than I expected from someone I barely knew. Sabine kept seeing Wyatt weekly through that whole stretch, and though most of what happened in those sessions was between the two of them, she gave me enough with his permission to understand where he was. He'd started drawing again, she told me. Not family trees this time, but pool lanes, stopwatches, little cartoon versions of himself mid-stroke. She said that was a good sign, that kids process control by drawing the things that finally felt like theirs again. In one session, he told her he'd started keeping a mental list of things he was allowed to want without asking anyone first. Swimming was at the top of it. Pizza with pineapple, which Priscilla had always vetoed as wasteful, was second. Sabine laughed, telling me that part. I did too, though it caught in my throat a little on the way out. Priscilla, in the weeks after the settlement conference collapsed, made a few last visible attempts to hold the old structure together. She enrolled Wyatt, without asking, in an additional weekly Bible study at a church 2 towns over, one Harold had recommended, and told him it was non-negotiable. When I found out and objected, she didn't fight it the way she once would have. She backed down almost immediately, something I'd genuinely never seen her do before, and I understood watching her do it that whatever confidence had powered 11 years of unilateral decisions had cracked along with the folder in that conference room. There were logistical complications too, the unglamorous kind nobody warns you about when a marriage ends this way. The house was in both our names, and neither of us could afford to buy the other out on our own, so it went on the market in July. A smaller, sadder process than either of us had pictured when we bought it together in 2016. Walking through it with a realtor while a stranger's family imagined their own furniture in rooms that still held 11 years of ours. It sold in 18 days, faster than expected, to a young couple expecting their first child, and there was something almost unbearably on the nose about handing the keys to people just beginning the same thing we'd just finished failing. I used my half of the proceeds, along with the money I'd been keeping separate since the frozen swim account incident, to put a down payment on a smaller place 15 minutes from Whitmore, close enough that Wyatt could walk to practice on the days I couldn't drive him. Priscilla moved into a rental near her parents at first, and later, that winter, into a small apartment of her own, the first place in her adult life. She told me once, almost surprised by her own words, that she'd chosen entirely by herself. There was a specific evening in late June that I think about more than almost any other moment in this whole story. I came downstairs late and found Priscilla sitting alone at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once laid out her legal pad terms, except this time there was nothing in front of her. No plan, no leverage, just her, sitting in the dark with the porch light throwing a thin yellow line across the floor. "I don't know how to be someone he wants to talk to anymore," she said, not looking up. "I used to be the one he ran to." I didn't say anything for a while. Some petty, tired part of me wanted to tell her that was the cost of what she'd done, that she'd earned exactly this. But mostly, in that moment, I just felt something close to grief. For her, for the version of her I'd married 11 years earlier. Warm and unguarded, before fear had calcified into something that needed to control everything it loved in order to feel safe. I think that woman was still in there somewhere. I don't think Wyatt will ever fully trust finding out. "You could start by asking him what he wants," I said. "Not deciding it for him, just asking." She nodded, and for the first time in months, it looked like an actual nod, not the performance of one. The custody case resolved that August, not with a trial, but with a mediated agreement that gave me primary physical custody and gave Priscilla generous unsupervised visitation, contingent on a court-mandated parenting course, and continued family therapy with Sabine for both of them, not just Wyatt. The relocation attempt, once documented, ended any real argument for anything else. It cost Priscilla close to $11,000 in legal fees by the time it was finished, money that came, I later learned, partly from a retirement account her parents had helped her tap early, with a 10% penalty on top of it. I didn't feel any satisfaction hearing that. I mostly just felt tired. The parenting course ran 8 weeks, 2 hours every Thursday evening, at a family services center across town, and Priscilla completed all 8 sessions without missing one, which the facilitator noted in her final report as a genuine point in her favor. I read that report when Diane forwarded it to me, curious despite myself, and one line in it stayed with me longer than I expected it to. Under a section on identified growth areas, the facilitator had written that Priscilla showed strong capacity for insight once she was given language to separate her own fear from her child's actual experience. months, that the two had been fused in her mind for so long, she genuinely hadn't known how to tell them apart. I don't know if that's forgiveness. I don't think it needs to be. It's just the closest thing to an honest diagnosis anyone gave the whole situation. The joint therapy sessions with Sabine were harder to gauge from the outside, since almost none of it was shared with me beyond scheduling logistics. But Wyatt mentioned once, offhand, that his mom had cried in one of the sessions when Sabine asked her to describe what she'd been afraid would happen if Wyatt kept swimming. He didn't tell me what she'd said. I didn't ask him to. Some things belong only to the people in the room when they happen, and I've tried since all of this to respect that boundary more than I used to. Wyatt is 13 now. He made regionals in the 100 backstroke this spring, missed the qualifying cut by 0.4 of a second, and cried about it in the car for exactly 6 minutes before announcing he was going to make it next year instead. A resilience I don't think he'd have had a year and a half ago, when a swimsuit was enough to end his entire world without warning. The Whitmore Aquatic Center put up a small plaque last winter for swimmers who'd competed there 5 years running, and Wyatt's name is on it now, etched between two kids he's grown up racing against since he was 7. Coach Renata still texts me updates most weeks, even the boring ones, a good practice, a personal best in a set that doesn't matter to anyone outside that pool, because I think she understands, better than almost anyone in this story, how much it costs a family to get back to something that ordinary. Eli Brannigan is back in the picture too, as it happens. He and Wyatt reconnected on their own last fall, no adult engineering at this time, after realizing they'd been assigned to the same middle school science class. He's come over for dinner twice already. I made a point, the first time, of not mentioning to Priscilla where the evening's plans had come from. Some decisions, I've decided, are simply Wyatt's to make now, and don't require an explanation from anyone. He lives with me most of the year. He sees Priscilla every other weekend and Wednesday evenings, and those visits have gotten easier slowly, the way healing usually does. Not in a straight line, but in a general, uneven direction toward something better. She comes to his meets now. She sits in the bleachers instead of staying home in protest. And last month I watched her stand up and cheer, actually cheer, when he touched the wall in a personal best time in the 200 free. It was a small thing. It mattered more than I expected it to. I still go to church, though not New Covenant. I found a smaller congregation about 20 minutes from the house, one that doesn't feel like it's keeping score on anyone's soul. Wyatt comes with me sometimes when he wants to, and stays home other Sundays when he doesn't, and I've made a point of letting that actually be his choice, which is a smaller thing than it sounds like, and also the entire lesson of everything that happened. I think about that sentence he said to me, on the worst night of all this, Mom always wins anyway, more than almost anything else from that year. It's the sentence that started me documenting, calling Sabine, calling Renata, learning what my own spine was actually capable of after a decade of folding. I think in some strange way, I owe him a debt for saying it, even though no 12-year-old should ever have to teach his father that lesson. Here's the truth I landed on, the one I didn't have language for back when this started. Love that needs total control isn't love. It's fear wearing love's clothes. Priscilla wasn't lying when she said she was protecting him. I believe even now that she believed that completely, but protection that requires erasing a child's own wants isn't protection at all. It's a kind of quiet erosion, one small permission taken back at a time, until the person underneath forgets they were ever allowed to want anything in the first place. I lost something in all of this that I don't think I'll ever fully get back. The marriage, obviously. But more than that, the version of Priscilla I fell in love with at a folding table handing out name tags on a Thursday night 11 years ago. I mourn her sometimes, quietly, the way you mourn someone who's still alive but became someone else along the way. That grief doesn't cancel out the relief of watching my son dive into a pool again without fear of losing it. Both things live in me at once. I've stopped expecting one to erase the other. Wyatt doesn't say Mom always wins anymore. He hasn't said it in over a year. Last week, getting out of the car after practice, soaked and grinning, he told me he thought he could shave another second off his backstroke by regionals next spring if he kept up his dryland training. I told him I believed him. He believed it too. That's the part that still catches in my throat sometimes. Driving home from that pool, watching him talk with his hands about split times and stroke counts in the passenger seat beside me. Not that he won something. That he still believes, after everything, that wanting things is safe again. I think a lot about what I'd tell the version of myself standing on that porch, listening to Harold explain the proper order of a household, still folding, still telling himself one more small surrender wouldn't cost anything. I'd tell him that the cost doesn't show up all at once. It shows up in a 12-year-old's voice, flat and resigned, explaining a power structure he shouldn't have had to understand yet. I'd tell him that no doesn't cost as much as he thinks it will, and that the marriage he's trying so hard to protect by staying quiet is already gone the moment his son stops believing his father will ever say it. I don't know what Priscilla and I would have become if none of this had happened. If Josie's competition suit had never caught her eye on that pool deck. If fear had never found a place to attach itself and grow. Some nights I let myself imagine it. The two of us older, still at that kitchen table, still married, watching Wyatt leave for college in a few years with both of us in the driveway waving him off together. I don't think that version of us was ever actually available to us us, though. I think the fear was always going to find something to attach itself to eventually, and I'm grateful in a strange, complicated way that it landed on something as fixable as a swim team instead of something worse, something that might have cost us more of him than it did. That's the whole story, really. Not spiritual warfare, just a boy who wanted to swim and two parents who had to relearn the hard way what protecting him actually meant.